questions from the audience, please. And identify yourself, please. And
my name is Tomasz Błoński. I'm a student from Wroclaw University. First of all, I need to say that I'm very humbled being able to ask you a question. You're a great hero, and my generation is very grateful for your sacrifice. Thanks to you, we can enjoy freedom and liberty in this country and in other countries of the Eastern Bloc. I would like to ask you about Libya. You've recently been in Benghazi. What's the worst case scenario if the country splits and Gaddafi stays in power on the West? What we can do then? What's the role of NATO? What's the role of European Union and United States? Thank you very much.
And on top of that, are we doing enough? And is Secretary Gates named 5 European countries this week, including Poland, that he thought could do more militarily?
First of all, let me say I have to speak frankly, I'm disappointed that the United States of America has turned it over to quote NATO. That was the administration's words. That's 7 countries, 28 countries in NATO, 7 are actively engaged. I believe that Gaddafi, and maybe it's as much hope as it is rational thought, but I believe that Gaddafi is on his way out sooner or later. We continue to see signs of crumbling in his government, defections, et cetera, and we have seen a rather dramatic increase in effective air activity, striking targets that a couple of months ago they really didn't consider. I'm happy to say they're giving new meaning to the word humanitarian assistance, but I think that we really must appreciate the fact that he was at the gates of Benghazi, and if we hadn't intervened, there would have been a mass slaughter along the lines of Srebrenica, something that we said never again. So we did the right thing by stopping him from going into Benghazi and slaughtering people. If we had declared a no-fly zone when the rebel forces were on their way to Tripoli, it would have been over then. Unfortunately, we felt it was necessary to wait until the Arab League, United Nations, et cetera, acted. But it is what it is. I think that Gaddafi will probably fall, as I said. Then comes the challenge to particularly Europe and the United States. I would argue that the European nations, particularly those closest to Libya, have the most at stake here. Therefore, it seems to me that they should be most heavily involved. The group in the Transition National Council are good and decent people, despite what you may have heard about Al-Qaeda, and we don't know who they are. I can tell you who some of them are. Their finance minister is a professor of economics at the University of Washington in Seattle. One of their leaders, their council, has a doctorate from the University of Pittsburgh. Another one that I met spent 31 years in Gaddafi's prison. I met some women activists that have fought Gaddafi in court for years. These are patriotic people who are united in their opposition to one of the most brutal and repressive dictators in the world. The only way I think that Al-Qaeda could penetrate into this scenario is if there was a stalemate, because then you would have thousands of frustrated young men who want to achieve their goals by other means. So if we could get the money to them, and we are moving in that direction, I'm happy to say. I think hopefully within days we would be able to free up some $30 billion of Gaddafi's asset for the TNC. Remember that Gaddafi subsidized all of the commodities, and if we're not able to continue that, that will drive inflation up dramatically in Libya, which would cause great hardship on the people. So I hope we can get the money freed up. I would recognize the Transition National Council as quickly as possible as the legitimate government of Libya. After all, I don't believe that Gaddafi is the legitimate voice of the Libyan people. And then we're going to have to contend to a significant degree over time with the tribal aspects of Libya. We all know that there are different tribal entities which are basically in some kind of, are to greater or lesser degree in control of parts of Libya, and there's going to have to be addressing that side, that aspect of the issue. I am confident that with Gaddafi gone, that these people will, with sufficient help, be able to build a democracy, a flawed one and a long, difficult process, but a democracy. And one great advantage they have, that, as you know, as opposed to Egypt, is the amount of money that they are. There's 5 million people in Libya, and there's huge amounts of oil revenues that they would have at their disposal, including, by the way, enough to reimburse the United States and our allies for the expenses that we've incurred because of the military campaign, same way that the Kuwaitis and Saudis did after Desert Storm. So if Gaddafi goes, I am optimistic, but they're going to need a huge amount of help. And I would have argued, finally, in summary, after the Iron Curtain fell, the United States and our European friends did a lot in helping with the fundamentals of democracy, voter registration, political parties, education of the voters, the kinds of things that are the fundamentals. And I think that we could do the same thing with these people, and we must do the same thing, and it's not expensive. I'll bet you that there's 1,000 volunteers right here in this city that would be glad to go to Libya and help them build democracy using the experience that we had here. So it's not as if we're asking for billions of dollars, but they are going to need a lot of help in the fundamentals of building a free and democratic society.
And it could happen soon. Please.
Rafał Ruczko, student of the National Security Wrocław University. I have a question about Republican strategy. What priorities will you have if your candidate wins an election next year? Priorities in security policy, of course. Thank you.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
Republicans option in the USA. Candidate for president election.
Well, first of all, there's an old saying that if you're a United States senator, unless you are under indictment or detoxification, you automatically consider yourself a candidate for president of the United States.
Maybe even that's not an impediment, Senator.
And by the way, after I lost in 2008, I have a line that I use a lot, and I slept like a baby. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and cry. Sleep 2 hours, wake up and kind of an interesting thing is going on right now, and that is because recent polls, because of our economy, show a certain weakness in the part of the presidency in the polls. We are now seeing some other people who we had not thought as prospective candidates considering jumping into the race, like the governor of Texas, like Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, who you know, and a couple of others are considering it. This is so early in the campaign that most voters, most Republican voters, are really undecided. And one of the unique aspects of our electoral system is the importance of this small state of New Hampshire. It has a huge impact as to who wins or who loses. And before that is the, quote, Iowa caucuses, and couple of the major candidates have said they are not going to go there. There's always upsets, and it's always exciting. And in the state of New Hampshire, the people, because of the long tradition of it being the first state, they examine the candidates very carefully. One of the jokes is a guy in New Hampshire said to another guy, said, "What do you think about John McCain for president?" And the guy said, "I don't know, I only met him twice." I think you're going to see upsets. I think you're going to see surprises. I think Governor Romney has worked very hard in solidifying a very strong base in New Hampshire. So I think he starts out with some advantage. There's now rumors that my former running mate may jump in, Sarah Palin. So I think it's going to be interesting, and I think it's going to be very exciting. And by the way, from my state of Arizona, we have had a number of people who have run for president and lost, which means that mothers in my state can't tell their children that someday they can grow up and be president of the United States. And my favorite joke is a guy one time from Arizona that ran for president. His name was Udall, and he walked into a barber shop in Manchester, New Hampshire, and said, "Hi, I'm Morris Udall, and I'm from Arizona, and I'm running for president of the United States." And the barber said, "Yeah, we were just laughing about that this morning." So you're going to see a lot of interesting things happen between now and next January, and that's the way that it should be. That's the way it should be, and so I'm looking forward to observing it.
Tough to beat an incumbent. Can you beat President Obama?
You know, history shows that there's only been 2 occasions in recent years. One was the case of President Carter, and the other was the case of President Bush I, that the presidents have not been 2-term presidents. I think that bringing Osama bin Laden to justice has a very beneficial effect and a deserved one for the President of the United States. And we saw a commensurate, well-deserved increase in the approval rating in the polls for the President. And not only for what he did, but he took a very tough decision in the way that he did it. But also, as Bush I found out after Desert Storm, the economy is really probably the defining factor in what voters decide. So it's really going to depend, again, to some degree on the economy. But I also believe that there will be some residual support for the president about bin Laden, not so much for bin Laden per se, but it resolves some of the doubts that some Americans had about the president on national security issues because of his lack of experience on national security issues. So I think that it'll be beneficial to him. But so much is going to happen between now and then. It was Yogi Berra that said, "Never try to predict, especially when you're talking about the future." So, but I think it will be very interesting.
Please.
Thank you. I'm Roland Freudenstein from the Center for European Studies, which is the foundation of the European People's Party in Brussels. And Senator, I would like to focus on the Middle East again and Israel and the foreseeable unilateral declaration of independence by the unity government and in Palestine. And there was a letter yesterday morning by 24 former European foreign ministers demanding that the Quartet actually drop its conditions for engaging with Hamas, and saying that the recognition of Israel's right to exist should be the goal and not the condition for official engagement and the recognition of Palestine. So how do you comment upon that? Do we have another transatlantic storm brewing? And the fact that these 24 are not representative of the whole of the European Union doesn't mean there won't be trouble between Europe and America. We saw that in 2003 when the EU was divided, but the whole Iraq thing was perceived as a deep Euro-American conflict.
And let me pick up one more, Senator, please.
Łukasz Kulesa, National Security Bureau of Poland. Senator, I would like to turn from south to the east, to Russia, and ask you a question about the future of the internal situation in Russia. Are there the ways in which we can influence the development of the Russian system? and also about the international relations, how to deal with Russia internationally. The reset has been done, there's been some achievements, but what would be our mid to long-term strategy regarding Russia at the international stage? Thank you very much.
A question on Russia on the international stage and how do we deal with it? So Israel and Russia.
On the first question, I think that it's probably in as crucial a phase as we have seen it since the '67 war. In one respect, time is not on the side of the Israelis. I think that as we see the elections proceed, especially in Egypt and other countries, that you'll probably see some politicians using anti-Israel rhetoric and stoking their citizenry in that way, unfortunately. On the other hand, from the Israeli standpoint, how do you deal with a coalition government, one part of which is dedicated to your destruction? And I think that it's pretty obvious that the Prime Minister has his party base, which is composed of some, at least part of it, is people that have never wanted serious negotiations. I mean, that's just a political reality. I thought it was a mistake at the beginning to demand as a precondition a freeze on the settlement. Obviously, the administration had to abandon that position, and then the Palestinians did not. And just as I believe that dictating that the '67 boundaries plus land swaps was not an appropriate precondition, unless, of course, you wanted at the same time to tell the Palestinians that they'd have to give up their right of return. Everybody knows there's not going to be a right of return. Most people know that something along the lines of the '67 boundaries will also be a basis for settlement. This sounds pretty off the wall, but you know, the person that came the closest to reaching a settlement, and he came that close, was Bill Clinton. And I would recommend asking, particularly now that Senator Mitchell, who we all had the highest respect and regard for, is left the scene, I would try to have President Clinton engaged. He knows the players, he knows the situation as well as anybody that has been, any American that's been involved in the issues. So what I would like to see, and it may not be possible, but a convening of another conference somewhere, I don't know if Camp David is the right place, but with no preconditions, with everything on the table. We all know what the outlines of a settlement are. Everybody, you can draw them now. But it's a matter of getting the two sides together and agreeing. By the outlines of a settlement, or what was turned down by Yasser Arafat at Camp David, as you know. I am very worried, of course, about the Syrians continuing to divert attention from their internal problems by trying to provoke some kind of conflict or confrontation on the northern borders with Lebanon. This idea of trucking Palestinians down from the refugee camps and having them storm the borders is something that's very dangerous and should indicate to us, again, how quickly conflict could break out, possibly break out again in the area. So it would be my position, and I think a lot of my colleagues in the Congress, to say, okay, situation have changed, conditions have changed, let's sit down without any preconditions. But we understand that in order to have a final agreement on anything, you have to recognize a country's right to exist. I mean, it may not have to be a precondition, but it certainly has to be an outcome. Obviously, there is no outcome. So I worry a great deal about the Israeli security with these new governments if in Egypt and other countries in the Arab world, if things went in the wrong direction.
For the news reporters in the room, the headline is, Senator McCain calls upon President Obama to appoint President Clinton the special envoy. I just wanted to...
I was sure that I would get an irate call from President Clinton, who's very happy with his life as it is. And again, I want to emphasize, this is a time of danger, but it's also a time of opportunity. It's a time of opportunity to get this issue resolved. Otherwise, the prospects for long-term peace in the Middle East are in serious jeopardy, in my view.
And on Russia, the question on Russia, both Poland and the U.S. have been running a reset policy.
Well, I've often said that I looked into Mr. Putin's eyes and I saw 3 letters, a K, G, and a B. When I observe Russian behavior, in some ways I am encouraged. I'm encouraged about better relations between Russia and Poland. I think that's significant and important. I see improvement when I see the Russians at least abstain as far as a resolution concerning Libya is concerned. There's some areas where I see some improvement. But what the Polish government and people stand for, and what the American people stand for, and what really democracy is all about, is being betrayed on a regular basis in Russia, whether it be the rule of the law, whether it be taking someone like Magnitsky and letting him die in prison, Khodorkovsky having his sentence extended to the point where it is practically a death sentence, the routine abuse of the fundamentals of human rights, transparency. I'm sure that as long as the price of a barrel of oil is over $100 a barrel, that the Russians will probably have enough to keep these things at a certain level of importance. But it grieves me to see a country that had so much promise now being ruled by an oligarchy, which is in final, frankly, betrayal of so many of the fundamentals that we so strongly believe in. And one of the most important, of course, is rule of law. Rule of law is not, it may be in some degree apparent in Russia, but certainly not where situations in which Mr. Putin is interested in. And so the Russians, as you know, are going to seek entry into the WTO. And I think we ought to have a very interesting discussion about that as we go through that process.
Thank you. We're down to our last couple of minutes, so I'm going to try to take 2 or 3 questions here. Please make them very brief questions. These 2 right here, and then, yeah.
Irinat Keshilashvili from Georgia, the question related to the same region. How do you see, from the American perspective, the usage of soft power now, after the August 2008, in this particular region? Thank you very much.
So in Georgia, and let me gather these senators so we can get to these last few questions.
Bartłomiej Grzebyk, the first year of European diplomacy at the University of Wroclaw. Senator, I would like to ask you about the Caucasian region, about Georgia also. President Saakashvili claims that Russians are leading the neo-imperialistic policy in this old Soviet Union region. And I would like to ask you about your thoughts about this issue. Thank you.
Okay, 2 questions on Georgia, please, Andrew.
Senator Andrew Mikta, director of the GMF Warsaw office. Just a question on NATO. Secretary Gates yesterday gave a very powerful statement, to put it discreetly, on the state of the alliance. And this is something that has been a theme coming up periodically in our discussions. Basically, the disconnect between what we say we will do and the resourcing of defense and the growing transformation of NATO into, I don't know, an OSCE with a military committee down the line. What can we do better, Senator, to make sure that the transatlantic purpose is strong and that we stay together as allies? Thank you.
Well, thank you. On the subject of Georgia, and I left that out when I talked about Russia. They are occupying parts of a sovereign nation in violation of their internationally recognized borders. I mean, that's just a fact. And they've gotten recognition from, I believe, Nicaragua and I've forgotten who else. But the fact is that the Russians, whether provoked or not, and I think that's open to discussion, occupied parts of Georgia and are now continue to occupy despite agreeing to the terms of a ceasefire negotiated by President Sarkozy. And so it's, to me, a really tragic situation. But on the other hand, you watch Georgia's economy grow, their transparency, their good government, and of course they have some problems, some internal problems. But Georgia has become a thriving and vibrant economy, and obviously the Russian economy is based largely on their oil revenues and not much else. So I think Georgia can serve as an example to other emerging countries that with transparency, with rule of law, build your police stations out of glass, as they have in Georgia, so everybody can see inside. Do the things that will encourage investment and transparency rather than having to bribe people in order to do so. I will continue to support country of Georgia, and I will try and act on the defense authorization bill to authorize the sale of defensive weaponry to the country of Georgia. I think they ought to have the ability to defend, and I emphasize defend themselves. I thought Secretary Gates' speech was very powerful. I don't think there's a man in government or a person in government. Well, there is. Secretary Clinton is highly respected by the American people. She has the highest approval ratings of anyone in America. And I think Secretary Gates has that same esteem, both within the United States and internationally. And it was a very powerful and strong statement that he made. And I hope that it will have some effect on our European friends, that they will devote more of their resources and efforts to defense. But I also would like to put it in some perspective. I guess the first year I went to the conference in Munich that's held every year, as you know, the security conference, the topic was the Europeans aren't doing enough. So over the intervening years, we've heard that constant refrain that the Europeans aren't doing enough. I'm saddened by the requirements that the British have now felt themselves under, that they are really dramatically reducing their defense capabilities. I hope that we will understand that we live in a world that is really unsettled and dangerous still. And we will continue to urge our European allies to do more in the area of defense. Having said that, and I will be one of the severest critics, I met with Chancellor Merkel and I criticized her directly for lack of German involvement in Libya. But I would also argue, on the other side of the coin, this is probably the most successful alliance in history. When you look at its length, at its durability, at the good things that have happened and done, that have been accomplished as a result of this transatlantic alliance, as we complain, and I love to complain, I love to beat up on our European friends, but when you look at the history of it, it's been an incredible record of accomplishment, and here we are looking at one of the examples of our steadfastness and the strength of our alliance. I'd like to mention one other thing very quickly with you, very quickly. I think that this whole thing in the Arab Spring, number one, is misnamed because I don't think it's an Arab Spring. I think it's going to happen in Burma. I think it's going to happen in China. I think it's going to happen in countries all over the world. There's something sweeping the world today, and it is facilitated by social networking. You cannot stop the flow of information. I don't have to tell you, one of the important events in history was when we got the printing presses in to the workers at Gdansk. The modern day version of that is our Blackberries, is our Facebook, is our Twitter. And they're not going to be able to stop that. Temporarily, they will be able to, but over time, they will not. And that's information, and that's power. How did the world know of the young fruit seller who burned himself to death in Tunisia? Well, one was Al Jazeera, and let's give them some credit, but the main reason was because of social networking. So I'm optimistic about the future of the world. I'm optimistic that the basic human yearnings and the things that we stand for, and we see the greatest example of here in Poland, will be, those benefits will spread throughout the world no matter where they are. I just came from Burma, a tragic and sad story, if there ever was one, and an Orwellian experience. But there's a woman there named Aung San Suu Kyi who inspires me every single day. Lech Walesa inspires me every day. Václav Havel inspires me every day. And now a young man named Mark Zuckerberg inspires me every day. Because we have now got the ability together to make a world and transform it, the likes of which none of us, just as short a time as a year ago, ever anticipated. And yes, there's problems and difficulties, and yes, we know about the Kerensky government in Russia and Bakhtiar in Iran and all the failed experiments at democracy throughout history, but we also have a lot of examples, including this one right here, of success, of freedom and democracy, and I am hopeful and optimistic that together, that a meeting 10 years from now, we will see a world in which representatives from all over the Arab world will come and attend and speak, and they will be the kind of examples of the people, like the people we honored last night at dinner. Thank you very much.
Senator
After
McCain,
that stirring speech, now I got to answer another question.
Well, so it was a very stirring speech, but Senator McCain's staff has given us about 5 more minutes of dispensation before you have to rush to the airport, and I see 1 or 2 more questions, so please.
Thank you very much, Fred. And thank you, Senator, for being here with us. Liviu Mureșanu, Oris Foundation from Romania. I want to ask you about the role of security sector reform in the MENA countries. I'm not sure that we can have the transformation in that part of the world without having a real security sector reform on the ground. And second, it's about, we are in a global forum here. What do you think about the role of the BRICS in the future? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa now. They could help us to solve the BRICS country.
Yeah. And let me, and then,
thank you very much.
And then let me ask, then let me close with my last question, and because it's related to this, and this will be the final question, then we can get you on your way to, some people have been saying during this conference that, in fact, Minister Sikorski said this yesterday, that the threat to us isn't so much radical Islam, but it's state capitalism. That there's this new model that actually works, it's economically successful. You have some thoughts on that, I know, and you've just come back from the Far East. You're talking a little bit about China and how China is performing in the world, which is the most prominent example of state capitalism, near double-digit growth over a number of years, so maybe you can deal with that issue as well. You just gave a very stirring, optimistic speech. How does that run up against this alternative for people in terms of development?
I think, obviously, the facts are that China is going to be an economic superpower. Various estimates as to when they surpass the economic strength of the United States of America. They are now working to fulfill Deng Xiaoping's 5th priority, which was strong national defense and a strong military. We continue to be concerned about this whole issue of cyber war that there's no doubt they are engaging in, and it is a really significant new kind of battle that we're going to have to devote a lot of assets to. I think the Chinese are nervous right now. Look at the way they have cracked down on even a small demonstration. I think they're very, very nervous about the Arab Spring. And I don't believe over time that a small group of men meeting in a Chinese seaside resort once a year, deciding the fate of 1.3 billion people, can last forever. And I think that there are some in China who realize that, but I think there are others who frankly do not want to realize that change has to happen. There are still hundreds of millions of people in China who are living in the same conditions that they did under Chairman Mao, unfortunately. So there are those significant contradictions. The question that we have to answer is, will China emerge on the world stage as a country that is in keeping with its economic status, or will it do things that I think are foolish? For example, continue to prop up the North Korean government, a government that sells weapons of mass destruction, that engages in the worst kind of oppression, repression. Ostensibly, it's because they're worried about a united Korea on the peninsula, on their borders. Why should they worry about a united Korea? I mean, maybe they could some years ago, but certainly there's no reason for that now. So here they are propping up a country that has 200,000 people languishing and dying in the worst gulag in the world. So there are signs of Chinese maturity, and there are signs of their immaturity. And one short-term effect already is that you are seeing alliances of countries in the region which are, we would not have predicted some years ago. And I guess an example of anything can happen, our new friends are the Vietnamese, as you know. There's a ship named after my father and grandfather, a destroyer, that is based out of Japan, and last September it paid a port visit to the port of Da Nang. Now that really shows you that if you live long enough, anything can happen. So you are seeing alliances in the region. It is important that the United States maintain its maritime presence in the region. Closer relations with Australia are probably important, and joint exercises. And that does not mean that we predict a confrontation with China. We do not predict a confrontation with China. But we should make sure that our alliances and relationships in the region, including ASEAN, including other alliances, are strong and viable. I met recently with Lee Kuan Yew, one of the smartest men in the world. And he said there is a scenario where the Chinese would be fairly well behaved until they have enough military strength to tell the United States of America that the Western Pacific is Chinese territory and for us to leave the Western Pacific. I don't know if that will happen or not, but I think it is a scenario that we have to be concerned about. And again, finally, I don't think China is immune to what's going on in the rest of the world. As they crack down on internet, as they crack down on Google, as they do try to exercise censorship, I don't think they can any more than the Russians and the then Soviet Union could back in the days of the Cold War. But I do think it is the challenge of the 21st century, and we need to do everything in our power to motivate China to proceed in a peaceful direction and be a major contributor to peace in the world. So interesting times.
Senator McCain, on behalf of the audience, let me congratulate you on your award last night, the Atlantic Council Freedom Award. Thank you for the time you've spent here, but most of all, thank you for your public service.
Thank you very much.